Look at this packed highway from above. Most of what you're looking at isn't cars, it's the gap between cars. Less than 10% of the space on every lane is actually made up of cars. The rest is just open road. Every driver needs a buffer in front of them, the time it takes you to react if the car ahead of you suddenly brakes. And at highway speeds, that's roughly 45 meters of road between cars. That's at the tightest possible packing at that speed, meaning that we're using 10% of the road at a best case scenario. So how can we shrink the gap between cars? It's actually pretty simple. Just speed up your reaction time. A driver takes about a second to react when something happens on the road. The very fastest humans can manage somewhere around 150 milliseconds. Two vehicles that are communicating directly can react in a handful of milliseconds, almost 50 times faster than the fastest humans. Whenever the lead car taps the brakes or sees a hazard, every car behind it gets the message almost instantaneously, and they can just slow down. This lets them act less like individual vehicles and a lot more like a train. This is platooning, and it's a real technology that already exists. In fact, this was demonstrated all the way back in 1997, the same year DVDs were invented. 8 cars driving in a tight platoon at 65 miles an hour on a California freeway. We did this decades before self-driving became possible, because this is actually a pretty easy engineering problem. Industrial machinery does this kind of precision spacing all day. The hard part about self-driving is everything else. Turns out with the right sensors and communication, this is actually pretty easy. Okay, so what does that get us? Improving the reaction time shrinks the gap and capacity climbs on any saturated highway. Today, a highway lane carries around 2,000 cars an hour. Platoon them at a half-second following distance, and that jumps to over 5,000, 2.5 times what we have now. And if we get really aggressive, down to a couple of inches between cars, it gets close to 10,000 cars an hour, nearly 5 times what we can do with human drivers. That's with the same speed limit and on the same highway. Way more people getting through, with no new infrastructure, just new software. Okay, so highways were a spacing problem. You fix the gap, you fix the throughput. Simple enough. But cities are a little different. They're inherently dense. Density is the point of cities. There's just not that much more room we can squeeze out of them. So what are the real causes of traffic in cities then? If you drive through a city, roughly a fifth of your trip is spent stopped or slowed at intersections. Intersections exist because human drivers can't safely cross paths without a turn-taking protocol. We would run into each other or get confused who should go next. So we built a protocol for this. The stop signs, traffic lights, right-of-way, everything else that makes a city work. We need simple rules to follow that everyone driving can understand. And simple rules aren't the best at getting everyone through. Sometimes you sit at a red light even though no one's coming the other way. This is just a waste. To fix this, we need much more adaptive traffic rules. Did you know that roughly 30% of downtown traffic isn't actually going anywhere? They're already at their final destination. They're just looking for somewhere to park their car. 30% of traffic is just looking for parking. Cars need to be parked at both ends of their trip, and in popular places, parking is scarce. If everyone wants to be downtown, there simply isn't enough room for everyone's car. To fix this, we need some way of getting the car out of the way by itself, once you've already gotten to your destination. Usually, when you buy a car, you would expect it to cover all your needs. So you buy the biggest car you can ever imagine yourself needing, not the one for your day-to-day travel. Maybe you bought a 6-seater for road trips, but you almost always just drive it solo to go get coffee. In fact, the average car trip in America only carries 1.5 people. Most trips are just the driver. But if you could call a different car for each trip, you'd summon the right one for the trip you're actually taking. No need to bring a car the size of a small apartment to pick up cough medicine. And 2 of these problems actually point to the exact same fix. Cars that drive themselves, that are hailed instead of purchased. And let's call them pods. They're designed to get you from A to B and then get out of the way. No more parking crews because the vehicle doesn't need to park. It just goes to pick up its next customer. And no more worst case ownership because you're buying the vehicle for just one ride, not for life. Most of these pods are designed for 2 to 4 people, with larger ones available when you need them. You don't need to worry about parking. You don't need to worry about insurance. You don't have to think about transfers or tickets, just what you're going to do when you get to your destination. So that's the system, a new type of transportation for cities. But how do we actually build it? Urbanists have been pitched pod systems for about 100 years. Personal rapid transit, pod cars, skyway, you name it. Most of them never shipped, and the ones that did never scaled past a single campus. These are fundamentally new and ambitious systems that require massive build out before you even know if it works. You had to lay out the network, build stations, and retrofit every street. And then you finally get a chance to see if people want to use it. These were all massive investments with entirely unproven technology. A fleet of tiny autonomous pods is different because we're already doing this today. Waymo, Zoox, and Tesla are already deployed in major cities across the US. Waymo in particular is already scaling rapidly. They've gone from 50,000 paid rides a week in 2024 to 500,000 today, a 10x in 2 years. And they're expecting 1 million a week by the end of 2026. This starts as a car and becomes a transit system, not the other way around. This will let us prove out the tech incrementally. More cities, larger geofences, and higher speed regimes. Each step validates and funds the next step. No moonshots, just a slow, careful rollout. Give people more road and we use more road. Adding more lanes fixes congestion temporarily and then demand catches back up. Then with the extra lanes, you get more lane changes and close calls. And with every minor incident, you send a ripple backward. Cars behind have to brake and then reaccelerate. And those ripples cascade back, making the resulting road even slower than it was originally. But that might only be true for human drivers. Coordinated braking means a tap in the front doesn't cascade backwards. Every car in the platoon brakes together. Reacting in milliseconds means that disturbances die down instead of amplifying. So when more cars show up, the road just keeps letting people through. If a 7,000-pound truck hits a 2,000-pound pod, the truck wins. When a light vehicle and a heavy vehicle crash, around 80% of the fatalities occur in the lighter vehicle. So understandably, everybody buys a heavier car because no one wants to lose that fight. This has resulted in a vehicle-size arms race in the US. And you might think twice about getting in a pod when you could cross paths with something several times its size. But this isn't actually a vehicle problem. It's a right-of-way problem, and there is a path out of it. In phase 1, we have full-size autonomous vehicles mixed with human traffic. This is what Waymo does today. Phase 2 has autonomous-only zones in congested downtowns. Once autonomous cars are empirically moving more people per hour than human drivers, congested cities have a good reason to give them dedicated road space. In phase 3, now that we have autonomous-only zones, the form factor can finally shrink. Autonomous vehicles are quite a bit safer than us humans. Across more than 170 million autonomous miles, Waymo's reported over 80% fewer injury-causing crashes than the human baseline. This is a massive safety improvement. So you can feel quite a bit safer in a small vehicle if you're surrounded by autonomous drivers. The trade-off is that we don't get a magic system overnight, but each phase is concretely buildable from the previous one. Okay, so the system ships. It works, it's safe, and it scales. But what I really love to think about is what happens after all of this. Once you take the human driver out of the picture, a lot of stuff we always assumed we needed stops mattering entirely. Roads always have a fixed direction. Why? Because humans need to know which way cars are coming from. Pods, on the other hand, can just talk to each other. They don't need painted lines to tell them where to go. Once you can allocate lanes at runtime instead of painting them on from the start, the whole geometry of the road becomes flexible. Right now, we have one-way streets that sit completely empty during rush hour, while others are packed to the brim. What a stupid reason to have traffic in cities. It's paint. You could just drive the other way. A road that used to have 2 lanes in each direction can have 4 lanes inbound in the morning and 4 lanes outbound in the evening, with 0 physical changes, just a software update. Humans need a shared signal to know whose turn it is. Robots can just talk to each other, way faster than we can, letting them thread through an intersection without stopping, barely even slowing. No traffic light has ever moved this many cars. This intersection isn't an intersection anymore. It's a place where 2 streams happen to overlap. Pods can be small, bike lane small, which means the city they get around in can be closer and denser, less like LA and more like Amsterdam. What if pods can couple, mid-traffic? They snap together, share a slipstream, and pop apart when one of them needs to go away. They don't need to brake for each other, they brake together. They don't need following distance because they essentially act like one vehicle. This isn't trains, it's not bikes, it's not cars. It's something weirder, more wonderful, and more adaptive. You walk outside and press a button. 12 seconds later, a pod pulls up. Not from a parking lot, it was already in motion a few blocks away. Redirected to you the moment you called for it. Less like a taxi and more like an elevator. Inside, you're not driving. You're not staring at a dashboard. You do whatever you'd be doing if you were already at your destination. Reading, eating, working, talking to the person you're with. The trip is no longer a thing you're enduring. It's transit time given back to you. Outside the window, the city is quieter. No more combustion engines, no more honking. The pods communicate wirelessly. They don't need to yell. The chaos you've been living with your whole life, the chaos you've stopped noticing because it's just the baseline, is finally gone. You get out, and the pod doesn't park. It doesn't loop the block looking for a spot. It leaves, back into the stream, on its way to its next rider. And the city you stepped out into has more room than the city you grew up in. Not because anyone tore anything down, but because we reclaimed the space that cars used to take up. That's the version of the future I keep coming back to. Not flying cars or hyperloops, nothing that requires fundamentally new technology. Just the thing that happens when we design the city around the person being moved, instead of the machine doing the moving. I'm Laz, and I'll see you in the future.